Well, while our deck is drying, we got a hull that we got to get ready. And while you're working on your deck, go ahead and leave all the forms and everything inside the hull, because you want to kind of get to the hull right after you take these out, because then it starts to get a little bit flimsy, right? So you want to take these out. You don't want to leave it in the hot and the cold and the hot and the cold and the damp and the dry, so that it expands and contracts and all that kind of stuff, because it just makes the deck a little bit harder to put on later. Okay, so this is a pretty simple process. What we're doing now is kind of cleaning up our mess here. We got to take all the tape out. Of course, we got to get our shear clamp out of here for, what, I think the third time now. All right, so in order to get these forms out, you got to first start by popping out all these little glue boxes that you had in there. You just kind of pop out enough so that you can get the forms out. Worry about the rest of them later. All right, and these little glue blocks that are up here by the shear, just a little tap ought to take care of them. Pop them right out, because hopefully you didn't put, you know, big gobs of glue on there. So you should be able to just give them a tap, loosen them up, peel them right out. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of that and pull all this apart so that we can sand down in here and do all of our filler and ultimately get the fiberglassing it. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We've got a hull over here, which is a 12-footer. It's wider. It'll be easier for us to film in there and show you the fiberglassing on the inside of the boat. So I'm just going to finish cleaning up the inside of this thing, and then we'll move it off and sand it over there somewhere while we bring in another boat to show you glassing the inside. All right, well, we are just about ready to start sanding this boat. But before we moved it over, I wanted to make sure that you understand, you know, take these, put them in a nice safe spot, because they're going to go back right in the boat. After we fiberglass the inside, these actually go back on the boat so that we can attach the deck to them. So make sure that they're marked so that you know exactly where they're going to go back on the boat. So put them in a safe spot, and all right, we're ready to start in. Okay, well, we wheeled in yet another kayak here. This is a little 12-footer, and so as we've been saying, we don't really like to do a lot of sanding with the equipment set up here. And this one's in a good spot, ready to continue on. So let me tell you basically what we've done here, right? We knocked out all the forms and we sanded. We used 80 grit paper to do a rough sand, and then you can see that we put our filler in here just like we did on the outside of the boat, and we've sanded down the side of the stems. Now I'm going to do the kayaks a little bit differently than we've done canoes in the past, and the reason for that is I can make it easier for you, and it won't make any difference in the end product. With a canoe, generally what we've done is we take a single piece of cloth, lay it in there, we make slits down the stems, the inner stems, and then we lay the cloth going in both directions so that it connects there. And it's not difficult, but there's an easier way to do kayaks. Remember now, the kayak is going to have a bulkhead here, it's going to have a bulkhead up here, and all of this stuff is going to be underneath the deck and in a hatch. So what that means is there's really no value to us having one piece of fiberglass throughout the whole thing. You can certainly do it that way if you've done it before and you're comfortable with that. By all means, go ahead and do it. But I'm going to show you a different way, which is a whole lot simpler, and takes about the same amount of time. So what we're going to do here, the procedure that we're going to do is, because of these stems, we're going to put a fillet going down each side. Remember, say over and over and over and over and over again. Fiberglass does not like hard corners, right? So we're going to get rid of the hard corners on either side of this inner stem. And we're going to do that by doing a fillet on all of it. And then we're going to let it dry, and then we're going to give it a little bit of sanding, and then we're going to come back and sand all of this out and give it our second rough pass at sanding. Now, something's been happening in the last few months. I've been getting some phone calls from customers who are getting bubbles on the inside of their boat, and I don't know why that's happening. And it's actually a pretty simple explanation. you know, we show you on the outside that one of the steps you do is after you do all your rough sanding, you wet the entire hull down, you let it sweat up and you let it swell up, and then after it dries, you go back and give it a fine sanding with, you know, no more than 120, 150 paper. And there's actually more reason to that than just looks. The way epoxy works is it's a heat-activated cure, right? So that means as it's starting to cure, it will generate its own heat. And if you heat it even more, it will cure even faster. Now, one of the problems with that is, and it's not a problem as long as you take care of it, is if you use staples or if you have any gaps at all between your strips, what happens is the heat, the air inside those pockets will heat up and it will push the epoxy up through the cloth and create air bubbles throughout your cloth. It's not the end of the world if it happens. Just take a little razor knife, cut them out, put a little patch there, and everybody's happy. But if you're trying to get, you know, the perfect cloth and you don't want any air bubbles to deal with, then you have to deal with any air pockets that you may have. So that means a nice smooth surface as you run your hands up and down. You don't want to feel any gaps in between the strips. Any place where there's a gap, like, you know, almost always down the center of the boat, you're going to have some gaps there. You want to make sure that you take care of that. All your staple holes, you know, so it's the same thing on the inside of the boat as it is in the outside of the boat, and it's just people just forget to do that step on the inside of the boat, and it's important. So again, you know, after I rough sand it, I do my fills, I'm going to do my fillet here, I'm going to come back and do a whole nother rough sanding, then I'm going to wet it all out, let it swell up, and then do my fine sanding after that. Okay, and then what we're going to do to make this all easier is we're going to fiberglass from the end of the inner stem to the end of the inner stem, and then we're going to put 4 pieces, and we're just going to overlap it by about 1.5 inches all the way around. Epoxy loves to stick to epoxy. So if you take 2 pieces of fiberglass cloth, wet it out, stick them together, it's going to be very, very, very strong. Not an issue. Don't have to worry about it. All right, so that's the plan. I'm going to go ahead and mix up some wood flour and filler, and I'm going to run my beads down here, and I'm going to make some fillets. And then let that dry for tonight. We'll come back in tomorrow. We'll do a little bit of sanding and fiberglassing, hopefully. Alright, so when I do my fillets, I always like to use this syringe for an applicator, just because it makes it a little bit neater job and a little bit less cleanup work. And I'm just going to put a big old gob going down the side here. This off to the side. My basic picnic spoon here. And again, this isn't so much about looks as it is function at this point. You know, the idea is we want to make sure we get a nice transition from one side to the other with our fiberglass. And the best way to do that is by sticking a fillet in here. Alright, one of the keys to working, especially if you're working with a syringe, is to get it out of the cup, get it out of the syringe, and get it on the boat. You've got plenty of time to work it once it's on the boat, but you've only got so much time to get it out of the syringe. So I'm just going to leave this mess right where it is right now. I'm going to shoot down the other side of the boat and start putting something down there.
Put your hand right my way.
All right, so the key at this point is to be more vigilant than the epoxy. So I'm going to be here a while, at least the next half hour or so. And I'm just going to keep molding it up in there so that it stops running. Because it will wear out after a while and then it'll start to thicken up. And if you can't, you don't have to get it all done in one shot. Get done what you can now. And if you look at it when it's done and say, boy, I need a little more down there, wait for it to, get solid enough so that you can come back and do a little bit more. But you don't want to put huge globs in there because it'll start to bubble up on you and be difficult to work with. But this just, basically what I call this is a tip of the picnic spoon fillet, which always works out fairly well. So again, for the next half hour, it's just a matter, I'm going to do this for a little while, I'm going to go down to the other end, do that for a little while, and I'm just going to keep cleaning up until when I drag my spoon on it, it feels like it's starting to get sticky. And that's when I know it's time to stop. Well, I've just about worn this epoxy out, and it's just starting to drag on the spoon a bit, so I know I'm almost there. But I just wanted to go over a couple of house cleaning tips here. If you are using a syringe, like I did, you want to use it again. So if you take mineral spirits and you just fill the syringe up halfway, shake it back and forth real good, and then give it a good hard pump, and that'll blow out most of the epoxy that's in there. And just do it again a couple of times, and that'll clean your syringe out. There is one other thing I wanted to go over, and that's down here on this side of the boat, so let's go take a look down here for a second. Now on some kayaks, the end of the stem is still going to be where the boat is still at a pretty deep V. And there's a slight V here, so what I'm going to do after this sets up, you can see I started to come around the front of this. I'll actually take a little bit of epoxy from probably about here, and I will mold up to this, kind of giving myself a gradual ramp. And I'll do a little bit of the same thing the other side. What that does is, as I put my cloth in here, gives everything a nice smooth transition, all right? So if you're working on a kayak where the hull's got a deeper V coming into this, then go ahead and I'm not talking about an inch of this stuff. I'm talking about maybe just a quarter of an inch or so smoothed out to give yourself a nice ramp and a transition for the cloth. Remember, everything in here, it's not about being beautiful. It's about giving yourself good adhesion so that we're bringing the boat together nice and strong. And this is going to help us do that, because none of this is ever going to be seen unless somebody sticks a light inside of your hatch to take a look. All right, so I'm going to work this for maybe 5 more minutes, and then I got to leave it alone, because then I'll be doing more harm than good.